Good morning. It's good to see you here. If you got a Bible, go to Psalm 13. Just curious, how many of you, when I say the word dial up, you know what that means? Raise your hand. Just curious. All right. Okay, a lot of you, not everybody. You know, dial up. If just to inform you of that don't know, dial up. It was if you wanted to get online. I know this is just crazy to some of you young people, but if you wanted to get online, you had to like connect, which means that it would go through this thing and it would dial up to get online, and you hear all this noise and stuff, and you'd have to wait to see if you would connect, and sometimes it would and sometimes it wouldn't, but you just have to sit there and wait for it to connect, and it'd kind of go through all of this thing, all this, you know, all that stuff, and then it would, and then there it was, and then if you had AOL, you would click on it and say, "You've got mail," and again, some of you have no idea. Like, we would get these discs in the mail. You remember the discs in the mail from AOL? Anybody? Just me? Okay, all right. And some of y'all, and yeah, it was a good time. So, but in our, and I don't know what it was like in your home, but in our home, we had one line, and so you had to make sure that nobody else was on the phone, or nobody was expecting a phone call, or nobody needed to make a phone call, and then you can get on it, and maybe you can get on it for 15 minutes, and then you got to get back off because, you know, mom's got a phone call to make, or dad's expecting a call, that sort of thing. This was our reality. You know what's funny is that wasn't all that long ago. And now here we are, and if you have to wait for like 11 seconds for something to download, you're like, this is ridiculous, right? Just forget it, you know. This is where we are. We're just kind of we're in a different day, and we don't like to wait. We don't like waiting. It's just not our thing. I mean, I remember, I've shared this before. I remember a day when if you wanted to know what time a movie started, you didn't pull out a phone. You had to go to the newspaper. And some of you are like, "What's a newspaper?" And you had to look up the times for the movie. We don't like to wait. Have you noticed that fast food restaurant, like all fast food restaurants now have 2 lanes? I mean, fast food is not even fast enough, right? It's like we got to get, like, what is going on? Like, look, get me this. This crazy. We're just not a culture that likes to wait. Now, listen, I understand that all of that seems really silly when we're talking about waiting for life to take a turn. When we're waiting for something, when we feel like we've been abandoned, or when it seems like we're just not getting anywhere. We're stuck in the same sin, stuck in the same ruts, or where there is this sin that just seems to own you, and you just to think that you would have victory over that sin just seems like a billion light years away. Or when you're waiting for a spouse, or you're waiting for a child, or you're waiting for God to bring healing to a broken marriage, or you're waiting for God to bring salvation to a child, or you're waiting for healing. Some of y'all right there, right now. This is the reality of your life right now. And maybe it's hard for you to even believe in a God. You believe in God because of the pain and disappointment and unanswered questions in your life. I mean, I talk with people about like that experience this, that say, you know, I don't know how a good God could be watching over my life and have it turned out like it has, or if He has, or if there is a God, I don't see how He can be good. It seems as though He has just abandoned me. I would imagine there's not a person in this room who has not felt that way somehow, some way. And if you haven't, I mean, I don't mean to be kind of just. You will. It's coming. But here's the thing. We're not alone in that. And one of the reasons that I love the Psalms, there are questions that maybe this is just my experience, but there are questions and frustrations and doubts that I'm just not sure that I'm allowed to express, that I'm not sure I'm allowed to get out there. But then the Psalms come along and say, no, yeah, this is just life. This is the life of faith. This is a life of a faith, trying to live this life in a broken world, trusting God along the way. That's what this is. And so we're not alone in this, and we certainly see that in Psalm 13. So if you've got a Bible and you're there, Psalm 13:1, this is how David starts. He said, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? You've heard it said that time flies when you're having fun. But when you are in painful times of your life, when you're going through the hard seasons of your life, it seems like life just moves in slow motion, doesn't it? And for David, this is what it feels like. Whatever it is that he's going through, it's just not letting up. And there were moments along the way where he's been praying and saying, God, would you do something? Would you show me? Would you? And he's just praying it through, and he's thinking, well, relief has got to be right around the corner. And when it wasn't around the corner, he just keeps bringing it to God and going, well, certainly it's going to let up soon, and it doesn't. So now David's going, okay, so I guess I'm on my own. I guess I've been on my own this whole time. God, are you just going to forget me forever? Will I ever have any sense that you're with me in this? David feels forgotten. He feels alone. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt forgotten? You ever felt alone? Kind of reminds me of sixth grade. Sixth grade, our family moved from the suburbs to the country. Same city, new school district. And I know anybody. And in my old school, sixth grade was elementary. In this new school, sixth grade was junior high. I was absolutely terrified. First day of school, I remember walking in, and I'm going down the hallway, don't know a soul, walking down the hallway, and I come to my class, and there's my teacher at the door, Mr. Matty. Never had a man teacher ever in my life. I'd only had sweet little lady teachers that loved me. And here's Mr. Matty just standing there, not even a smile on his face, and he calls me by my last name. He called everybody by their last name. Mr. Betts, nice to meet you. Take a seat. And he spent the entire first day. He was like this, he reminded me of I don't know if you've ever seen Robin Williams and Popeye the Sailor Man, but that's what I thought. That's who I thought he was. He looked just like him, and he's standing there, and during the entire first class, the first day, all that he did was just lay down the ground rules. This is what it is. This is how you're going to act. This is what you're going to do. This is how we do it. If you don't do this, it's going to go like this. You're going to do this. And it was just, he just went through the rules all day long. I didn't know anybody in the class. I did this man teacher is teaching me. What am I going to do? I go home and I just cry. I just cried to my mom, why do we have to live here? Why do I have to go to this school? And my mom, she told me she felt terrible. And I'm like, you should feel terrible, And this was awful. But I felt very much alone. But then in seventh grade, I tried out for the basketball team. Never played basketball before. Had only ever shot hoops in the driveway. But I tried out. I was trying to know some kids. I tried out, and then when they posted, this is the most humiliating thing ever. They posted that for everybody to see. They posted here's who made the team, and everybody makes the team except for me and another kid. This is just feeling. It was just feeling alone, feeling forgotten. Have you ever felt that? When everyone else is invited and you realize that you weren't invited? To feel abandoned, to feel forgotten by other people is most definitely difficult to bear. But what David is talking about here is more significant than that. David feels abandoned by, he feels forgotten by God. And that has David at the bottom. And he's not saying he doesn't believe in God. Honestly, that would be much easier. You say, well, he's just not there. There is no God to long for. That would be a lot easier, but he's struggling with the fact that he knows God is there. But he doesn't seem to be doing anything in his life. He hasn't felt the presence of God. His unrelenting circumstances seem to say that God has forgotten him. So is it true? Does this happen? Does God forget? Does God abandon? There was a time when Israel, the nation of Israel, thought that God had abandoned them as well. And the prophet Isaiah spoke the words of God to the nation of Israel this way. This is God speaking to Israel. In Isaiah 49, it says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you." Anybody ever forgot your kids before? Just me? All right. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. This is God going, look, you may forget your kids. I don't forget my kids. I don't forget my kids. He goes on, he says, behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. Like, how beautiful is that? God doesn't forget his own. They are always before him. So though what David is saying is not true, God has not forgotten him, but it is what he's feeling. His head is saying one thing. His head is going, okay, I know that God cannot forgive me. It's impossible. He will not forget me. I know that that's true in my head, but the darkness in front of him is telling him that God has indeed forgotten him, that God is hiding himself from David. And he goes on, he says, how long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? This is David saying, all this time, I've been trying to sort this all out. I've been trying to make sense of this. I've just been asking the question, why is this happening? What brought this on? And I don't see it. I don't have any clarity here. I don't see, all I can see is darkness. Have you ever been in the place in your life where all you can see is the darkness? And you go to bed and you pray that when you wake up, the darkness is gone. And so you wake up and it's not. It's like day after day after day after day. And sometimes those days turns into weeks and turns into months and perhaps years. Well, David's going to help us out with what to do when those times come. When the darkness just seems to not go away. What do we do? But really quick, before we get into what we do, let's just talk about some things that we're not going to do. All right? Let's just talk about some, just wisdom of what we're not going to do when we're in the midst of those dark days. One, when we're in the dark, we're not making any major life decisions, okay? We're not making major life decisions when all we can see is the darkness. It's not the time to make decisions about moving houses, changing jobs, making major purchases, or any other kind of major decision. We're just not going to do that. This wisdom tells us we don't do that. Two, I'm not going to write or text or type any kind of important letter, text, or email. Right? With all the emotions that come with the days of darkness, I cannot trust myself to not allow the despair and disappointment and frustration and fear and sadness to take over and spill out in words that I'll probably later on forget. And then one writer talked about this when these kinds of seasons come, that I'm not going to judge my spiritual life in those seasons. We see that with David. He's putting some things on God that are just not true. This isn't true, that God has forgotten him, that God has not forgotten him. We need to be careful to not allow our emotions to make those calls. And then fourth, when in days of darkness and despair, I'm not going to judge the spiritual life of others as well. Not only can I get it wrong for myself, but I can get it wrong for others. So then the question is, what do we do? What do we do when we're in the darkness, where it seems as though God is 1,000,000 miles away and the darkness will not let up? Now, if you've been with us throughout this study, some of this is going to sound familiar. And here's why that's going to sound familiar. Because what we're doing here is looking at the Bible for help. We're looking particularly at how the psalmists deal with these days. And so the reason it may sound familiar is because we've been here before. David has been in this season before. We have seen it. We have been through it with him. We saw it in Psalm 9. We saw it in Psalm 10. And we're going to see it again in places like Psalm 27 and Psalm 28 and Psalm 40. And David just keeps coming back to what he knows is true. Look, listen, just understand what we're doing here, all right? When we come together, what I'm doing each week with putting the Bible in our hands, it's not to try to give you something new, but to give you something that is true. So every time we hit a psalm of lament, it's not, okay, well, here's 3 new things to try. Here's 4 other suggestions that we should try. No, the Bible is true. It is living and it's active and it's true. And if it's true, it doesn't need updated. We don't need something new. We need something true. So David is in a spot in his life where these hard times are just not letting up, and he can't figure it out. He doesn't see the reason why he's struggling, and God seems to have forgotten him. So what does he do? Well, the first thing that we see that David does in this psalm is he cries out to the Lord. He cries out to the Lord. Even though he believes that God has forgotten him, has hidden his face from him, he is crying out to God, even if he doesn't feel anything. And here's what he says in verse 3. He says, "Consider and answer me, O Lord my God." Have you ever been in a season in your life? Have you ever been in a time in your life where you just felt like, or at some point in your life, you just felt like, I just need to let it out. I just need to get it out. And I don't need to get it out on anybody. I just need to get it out. And maybe you just had a day. Maybe it's just a day. It's like, yeah, I just need to get it out. Like go in the backyard and just like, just kind of let it out. I feel like that's what David is doing here. Like it's just kind of, he just built up like 4 times. How long? How long? How long? How long? And then it's, answer me. Answer me. And then he says, "O Lord, my God." I think it's interesting and it's necessary that we see this. "Oh Lord, my God." He knows who he's crying out to. In fact, when it says Lord in your Bible, it's all caps. That is the word. That is, we've said this before. This is the word, the name that God gave himself, Yahweh. This is a sacred name. They don't just throw this name around. And I think just for us, it's good to know, and it's good to consider, good to remember that David here, he knows who he's talking about. He knows who he's talking to. Psalm 13 is not a psalm of disrespect. It's a psalm of desperation for sure, but it's not disrespect. He knows who God is. He knows what God can do. David's longing to know the presence of the Lord. That's what he's after. It's some random momentary cry for help. He's intentional about what he's after. And here's what he asked God for. And I think this is so helpful. In fact, this was, as I was going through this psalm this week, I was going, you know what? I'm not sure how all of it's going to come together and not sure how we're going to approach it, but this one phrase just kept coming after me over and over and over again. He says this, and he says in the second part of verse 3, "Light up my eyes. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. Light up my eyes." David is going, I just want to see you, God. I just want to see you. He's not asking for God to even lighten the load. He's just saying, would you just lighten my eyes? It's like David is saying, if I'm going to have to go through it, I'll go through it, but at least I just want to see you, God. I want to know that you're in this, because if I know you're in this, then I can go through it. I mean, you've felt this before, haven't you? I mean, what's worse than pain? Meaningless pain. And David's going, but if I could just see that you're in this, then I know this isn't meaningless. I know that you're using it. Even if it's hard, it's coming from the one who loves me. And that's the hope that I need. So would you just light up my eyes? I want to see you. David asked for God to light up. Light up his eyes. God, what are you doing in this? What is this? What are you doing? Are you in this? Another way we could ask that question is why do we find ourselves in the dark days? Like, why does God bring dark days? Why does God allow dark days to come? If God is sovereign, then why does God allow seasons of darkness to come our way? Well, the first thing is we need to understand, and I say this over and over to you, and I'll just keep saying it because maybe I'm saying it for myself. But you and I need to understand that if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, it's not about God's punishment. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, which don't move by that too quickly. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you have repented and put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, then the dark days, the darkness, the hard times, it is not about God's punishment on your life. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, all of God's wrath on your sin was put on Jesus at the cross. You are fully loved. You are fully accepted. That all of that was put upon Christ. There was no wrath, no punishment left for you. Suffering is not about punishment, but it's about God shaping you into the likeness of his Son, into the person that he created you to be. Someone had said it like this, for God to leave you healthy and content with everything going perfect for all the days of your life, right up to the judgment where you are damned to hell, well, then that would be cruel of God. But for him to give you a thorn in your flesh, for him to get you sick, for him to free up your hands off of a good thing that you've turned into an idol, to free you up from the idea that you're in control and show you how dependent you are on him, is one of the most merciful things that God could ever do for you. Sickness or difficulties in relationships or unmet desires or unmet expectations or whatever it is, it's not about punishment for followers of Jesus. He is revealing to you out of his mercy your desperate need for him. This is what James was saying when he said, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Listen, it is good for me, it is good for you to have some sleepless nights. To have those moments where you don't know if you're going to make it. It'll bring you to your knees and it'll make you pray better. It'll make you trust God more. It'll make you more compassionate to those who are hurting. It'll humble you. It'll make you realize, had it not been for the Lord, my enemies would have swallowed me up. But now that I've been through some stuff and I know that he is with me, I can keep going. I'm better for it. I can press on with what God has called me to do. And so David says, God, would you just light up my eyes? Would you help me to see that you're in this? Because if I know that you're in it, well, then I can go through it. Which leads to another reason the darkness comes. That it's through our suffering that the people around us see the beauty in the worth of Christ. And another psalm, in fact, if you would, just go over to Psalm 40. David is facing something very similar in Psalm 40, but this time David writes about coming out of this darkness. David writes about coming out of this season. We don't have that in Psalm 13, but in Psalm 40, he says, this is where I've been, and this is what God did. And so he writes about coming out of the darkness. Listen to what he says in verse 1 through 3. He says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me, and he heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet on a rock, making my steps secure. And check this. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. And many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. In other words, one of the things that God was doing in David and what he does in us, that through our dark seasons, he uses them to make himself known so others will come to see who he is. That the world is looking on. There are people who don't believe that the Bible is true, who do not understand that Jesus is the risen King. They look on, and when we have convinced ourselves that somehow people are going to look at our lives and see how awesome it is, and then that's what's going to make them want the Lord. Like someone's going to look at how great your life is and go, well, I just want what you've got. Give me some of that. Well, of course they want what you've got. But what they want is not Jesus. What they want is your awesome life. The Bible has a word for that, and that's idolatry. But of course I'll have Jesus if it gets me the car. Of course I'll take Jesus if it gets me wealth and well-behaved kids and health and a great marriage. But what reveals the greatness and the beauty and the worth of God is when in the middle of the darkest seasons of our lives that just don't seem to go away, and there seems to be no relief in sight, that we're able to still, in that situation, to discover what God is teaching us, how to trust him. In the dark, when the lights are off. It's like when my kids were small and we'd put them in bed and they would say, Dad, could you just leave a light on? And say, well, okay, we'll leave a light on and maybe we'll leave a closet light on or maybe some other little lamp in the room. We'll leave a light on. And so after several days of doing this, Dad, would you leave a light on? Would you leave a light on? Would you leave a light on? At some point, you tell your kid, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to leave the light on. Well, would you at least leave the bathroom light on? Okay, I'll leave the bathroom light on. All right, and you kind of go through that for a while. Then all of a sudden, will you leave the bathroom light on? I said, no, actually tonight I'm going to close the door. Well, would you at least leave it open just a little bit? And so you leave the door open just a little bit. Now listen, if your kid is 27 years old and this is still going on, that's a problem, right? But these are conversations that we're having with God. And in the middle of it all, he's been saying to us this whole time, I've been coming to you to teach you to live with the lights off, not the lights on. I mean, anybody can sleep with the lights on. It's when it's in the darkness, when darkness seems to hide his face, then I can rest on his unchanging grace. Not on the lights, but on the one who is the Father of lights, as James says, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. So when the darkness comes, when the darkness looms, we should pray. Even when we don't feel it, especially when we don't feel it, we should cry out to God. God, would you light up my eyes to see? Would you let me see that you're in this? Is there sin that needs to be confessed? Is there an idol that I'm trusting in that needs to be repented of? Are you preparing me for something? I don't know, but would you just light up my eyes to see that somehow, some way, you're here, you're in this? David cries out to the Lord, and then David remembers who God is and what God has done. He cries out to the Lord, and then he remembers who God is and what he has done. This is what he says in closing. He says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Now here's the thing. Nothing regarding David's situation has changed from verse 4 to verse 5. He's still in the same situation. And yet David goes from where God, are you going to forget me forever? To, I trust you. My heart rejoices. I will sing to the Lord. And listen, this isn't David saying, well, once God gives me what I ask, once this all kind of works out, then I will trust him, and then I will rejoice in him, and then I will sing to him. No, this is David declaring that in the dark, where God is silent, where he feels forgotten, that he will trust, that he will rejoice, and he will sing to the Lord. Not because of what he hopes God will do, but because of what he knows that God has already done. I will trust in your steadfast love. It's a love that never quits. This is what he's saying. I know this about you, God. I know your love never quits. I know it. That even if God was disciplining David for sin, God has shown himself to be the one that's full of mercy, whose love never ceases. That even if I don't feel it at the moment, I need to bring my emotions under what I know to be true. And God, I know your steadfast love. I know your love never quits. And having trusted in God's steadfast love, David rejoices in God's salvation, that he is the one who gives beauty for ashes, that he gives gladness instead of mourning, that he takes a faint spirit and replaces that with a garment of praise for his name and for his glory. And then he says, and then I will sing to the Lord. Man, it's hard to sing when you're in those days, isn't it? I'm talking just like literally getting the words out. When all you see is the darkness, when it doesn't seem like God is there at all, that he has abandoned you altogether, to get the words out. It's much easier to replay the circumstances of your life over and over and over in your mind. It's much easier to rehearse in your mind, it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be this way. I'll never know joy. I'll never know peace. And so, David, how do you sing, man? And he would say, you remember what is true. You remember what is true. You're not trusting in what you feel, but in what you know and have found to be true. That God's love never ceases, that it is steadfast, that it withstands whatever fumblings and failings that we fall into, which then causes me to rejoice in the fact that he is the God of my salvation. That God, you have saved me from sin's penalty, and you are saving me from sin's power. And one day you will save me altogether from sin's presence. And therefore I can sing. And so I will sing. So when God seems a million miles away, Cry out to him. And remember who he is. Remember what he has done. That God's love never quits. And that while we were yet sinners, he sent Jesus for our salvation. That is who God is. That is who God is. That's who he is when the lights are on. And that's who he is when the lights are off. Let's pray together.